of Richard M. Allen is sure a major step in leading to the conclusion of this long-term and complex investigation.
Shame on you! Shame on you, Richard! You're going to prison for the rest of your life!
Will today be the day a jury decides the innocence or guilt of Richard Allen in the Delphi murders trial? We're on the ground in Indiana. A live report just moments away. And 3 people now facing charges in the death of singer Liam Payne. What we know about those involved, that is trending in true crime. Also this hour, Suzanne, Simpson's husband, now charged with murder. Their daughter is speaking out against him as the search for her body continues. Plus, should a judge take the death penalty off the table for accused killer Bryan Kohberger? It's all next, right here on Opening Statements. Good morning and welcome to Opening Statements. I'm Ted Rollins, in for Julie Grant on this Friday morning. So glad to round out another week with you. This show is all about setting the table. The opening statement for the day ahead at Court TV, and we have a busy day. We're going to be going out to Hawaii for the babysitter murder case. We're going to be, of course, talking about Delphi, and it's just another busy day. And we're going to start with Delphi, but first let's take a look at the daily docket.
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it? Shame on you! Shame on you, Richard!
All right, here's a look at some of the cases we're following today on Court TV. We're in verdict watch after 18 days of trial in Delphi in the murder case against Richard Allen. It's day 2 of jury deliberations. They're set to begin 9 a.m. Eastern time, about an hour from now. In Wisconsin, a status conference hearing is set at 9:30 for 15-year-old Eric Mendoza. He's accused of beating to death a 5-year-old last October. And Isaac Apodaca has a plea hearing in New Mexico today. That's 1 o'clock Eastern time. He, along with his girlfriend, are accused of fatally stabbing a woman with a sword. But we want to begin with our top story. It is day 2 of deliberations in the Delphi murder case. All right, it is day 2 of deliberations, but let's face it, they only went for 2 hours yesterday when they got this case, the jury. Defendant Richard Allen accused of brutally killing best friends Abby Williams and Libby German. Back in 2017, despite the prosecution saying that Allen confessed to the crime on multiple occasions while behind bars, his defense says he was exhibiting psychotic behavior during those confessions because he was held in solitary confinement, and the jury should pay no attention to all of those confessions. He had nothing to do with these murders. He faces life behind bars, of course, if convicted. It's a case we have been watching for years. And at the center of this case for years, reporting on it, is Court TV's senior producer, Barbara MacDonald. She has been our eyes and ears for this case as well in the courtroom because no cameras are allowed. Good morning to you, Barbara. Set the table for us. It's day 2 of jury deliberations. I can imagine the electricity outside that courthouse and around this town as we approach this pivotal day.
Good morning, Ted. Yeah, that's right. You can feel the tension. Everyone is on pins and needles awaiting word from this jury of 8 women and 4 men that they have come to a decision. As you mentioned, they deliberated for 2 hours yesterday after getting the case at 1:25 in the afternoon. Now, the judge has told them that they can deliberate between 9 and 4 each day unless they choose to stay later. Yesterday, they chose to leave earlier than that 4 p.m. deadline. The jury in this case is sequestered, meaning rather than going home, they went to their hotel. They are not allowed to continue those deliberations at their hotel, but they are allowed to talk about the evidence when they are all together. They also were given throughout this trial copies of most of the exhibits. They have a file folder that's probably about 5 or 6 inches thick at this this point with copies of documents and maps and images and statements from people. And they also were allowed to ask the jury, or ask rather the witnesses, questions throughout this trial. And for some witnesses, they had as many as 15 questions. So perhaps they are further along in the deliberation process than a jury that would be, quote unquote, starting from scratch when they get back to the deliberations room. We don't know what it means that they went home early yesterday. Could it be that they have made a decision and wanted to sleep on it? Or could it be that they're fighting and wanted to take a break from the tension and start fresh today? Today is day 19 in this trial. The judge had initially set the calendar until November 15th as the deadline for testimony in this case. So conceivably, we could have a verdict either today or even tomorrow. The jury is allowed to deliberate on Saturdays. Court was in session every Saturday of this trial, but the judge says she will not allow them to deliberate on Sundays. Ted?
Let's talk a bit about the closing arguments. And the big question here is, how does the defense get around these confessions? Talk about how they address that, not only during the trial, but during the close, trying to convince this jury, do not pay attention to what Richard Allen said himself.
Yeah, so there were allegedly 61 confessions or admissions of guilt by Richard Allen, but some of them contained incorrect information. In one, he said that he molested Abby and Libby. In one, he said he shot them. Neither of those things are true. He also confessed to killing his entire family, including his grandchildren. He doesn't have grandchildren, and no one in his family has been killed. He also admitted at one point to starting World War III. So the defense is attacking them on the inconsistencies in the statements and the vagueness of the actual statements where he did say, I did it, or I think I did it, I believe I did it, things like that. Ted?
All right, let's bring in YouTuber and the host of Grizzly True Crime YouTube channel, Gisela K, and criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Joe Tamarino. Good morning to both of you. In the closings, the prosecution addressed the jury, and at the end of it, it said that, I'm going to leave you with this. Libby said, someday I'm going to grow up and help solve crimes. And that is exactly what she did when she brought Abby along with her. Gisela, this case is so emotional and the crime so heinous that you could argue it doesn't matter who's sitting at that defense table, that jurors get so, the public is so upset with this case and what took place and what happened to these two beautiful kids. What's your overall take from what you've heard out of this courtroom, from Barbara's reporting and others? Does the defense have a chance here?
I think they do. I think they've created or brought in some reasonable doubt, and I really think that this verdict could go either way. Especially, I love timelines, so anytime when there's a trial.
Oh, Gisela froze. Joe, same question.
Yes, they absolutely do have a shot at this case, and here's why. There are real concerns about having 6 months of solitary confinement. I mean, think of it this way. Under United Nations laws, it's basically a war crime to keep someone in solitary confinement for an extended period of time. And that basically means more than 15 days. Why? Because human beings will fall into a psychosis. They could hallucinate. They could become extremely depressed. And that's obviously what happened to Mr. Allen in this case. Dr. Martin testified very clearly that Mr. Allen had to be placed on specific medication, Haldol, because of his psychosis. That's a powerful medication. So I think that the state really did itself a disservice by having Mr. Allen kept in solitary confinement for that period of time. So yes, he's got a shot with that, as well as the discrepancies in the way that they tested the bullet, as well as the information that came out at the very end of the case about Libby's phone, and that there could have been some other person who plugged something into her phone. So the defense has a number of issues that I think could tip the scales.
And Barbara, to the point of the the confessions and the defense, they really did lean into his confinement. And even their clothes, at the very end of the clothes, they put up a picture of a python and said the python is the state in this case, and we're asking you to set Richard Allen free and find him not guilty. The python is wrapped around some sort of prey here. They really did sort of tell this story of this guy who was just absolutely tortured by the state of Indiana, even before trial. Did it play, do you think, in your estimation?
I think it potentially did with at least some of the jurors. Not only did they really lean into those statements, they even had the warden of the prison testify that Richard Allen's treatment was unprecedented. In his 28 years of law enforcement, he had never seen a pretrial detainee held in those conditions for anywhere near as long as Richard Allen. They also really showed jurors videos of Richard Allen in that jail, in that solitary confinement prison, and being moved and even given an involuntary injection of that Haldol medication. And he's strapped down. He appears to be catatonic in that video. Some of the jurors really struggled watching those videos. One man in particular who had testified at jury selection that he really struggled with very graphic content, closed his eyes, winced several times, and put his head in his hands at one point watching that video.
Gisla's back. Gisla, the Judge Gold in this case not only didn't allow cameras, didn't allow the defense to go down a lot of different avenues, the Odenism path, also to bring up the alternative suspects, because during this 5-year investigation, there were other people with legitimate concerns in terms of possible involvement. The jury didn't hear that. How much did that change this case?
I think if it was allowed in, it could change it quite a lot. But either way, I think the defense brought in some reasonable doubt. I think the state's timeline is a little bit fuzzy, and I think it could go either way. I hope for a verdict today.
Okay. Gisla, as always, thank you. We're going to get a break in here. Joe's going to stick around. Barbara's going to be on Court TV throughout the day today. It's a huge day in Delphi, Indiana. We have you covered. If there is anything, a question, or, of course, a verdict, Barbara will be there and deliver it to us throughout the day as we wait for this jury. Coming up next on Opening Statements.
I don't believe that our Constitution allows for us to move forward and make him sit on death row for years and years and years when the way Idaho's doing it right now isn't really working.
Bryan Kohberger fighting to strike the death penalty even before his trial begins. But next, out of the break, arrests have been made in connection to the death of singer Liam Payne. Who exactly has been charged? We'll talk about that next.
Tonight on Court TV.
I'm Vinny Politan. Welcome to Closing Arguments. We have a big hour ahead here.
Your deplorable actions are unforgivable.
The community still doesn't know how this Boston police officer died.
He can't prove one element of his case. It was a dramatic day, a dramatic moment inside the courtroom.
What's happening here?
It's unreal. Let me show you exactly what happened.
Closing Arguments with Vinny Politan. Tonight at 8/7 Central. Only on Court TV.
Welcome back. Now for trending in true crime. Police have arrested 3 people in connection with the death of a former One Direction star, Liam Payne. Payne died October 16th after falling from a 3rd-floor balcony at a hotel in Buenos Aires. They're charging them with abandonment of a person followed by death. And 2 are charged with supplying Payne with narcotics. The first suspect is a person who accompanied Payne daily during his time there in Buenos Aires. The second is a hotel employee who's accused of supplying the singer with cocaine twice during his stay. And the third is the alleged drug dealer, supplying the drugs twice on October 14th, 2 days before his death. People magazine reports that Payne's toxicology results showed cocaine, alcohol, and prescription antidepressants in his system at the time of his fall. And Argentinian authorities are saying they don't believe his death was a suicide because he had no idea what was happening at that time due to the state of his intoxication. So this morning we're asking, how responsible are the suspects in his death? Here to discuss, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Joe Tamburino, retired NYPD detective Mike Alcazar, and criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor David Bruno. Good morning. This case, Mike, the people around him, what responsibilities do they have? And this is Argentinian law, not U.S. law. But if this took place in a New York hotel, do you think the people around a Liam Payne, who died because of intoxication, basically, would be charged? And should they be charged?
We saw this happen with Mac Miller, Matthew Perry. We held these people responsible. They're supposed to be guardians for the stars and provide them with drugs. So I wasn't surprised that they charged them.
And Michael Jackson, yeah, you had that. David Bruno, your thoughts on the responsibility levels of these three people around him in the context that, and we're going to play a 911 call here that was made by the hotel manager. People around him at that point, strangers, the hotel employees, were very concerned. Let's listen to that 911 call and get your reaction. If the manager of the hotel's calling authorities saying this guy's out of his mind and his friends leave, let's listen and then talk about it.
Y necesitamos que nos envíen a alguien urgente porque, bueno, yo no sé si corre riesgo la vida del huésped. Está en una habitación que tiene balcón y, bueno, estamos un poco con temor de que haga algo que le ponga en riesgo su vida. ¿Hace cuánto que está ahí o es un hotel de vivienda? No, es hace 2 o 3 días que está acá.
And this is before he falls off the balcony, and they're concerned. Right. David, his friends apparently not so concerned. Your thoughts on this prosecution?
Well, let's look at count number 1, all right? And this is different law. This is Argentinian law, but it alleges abandonment of a person following a death. So if you look at that statute itself, it is alleging that that person knew of the death. So you could imagine that person is probably up in that room, maybe sees him die or fall because he fell off a balcony. The medical examiner opines that it was because the death was because of the trauma, not because of the drugs. And this one person is charged with the abandonment. The other 2 people are charged with distribution-related offenses. Now, like we are talking about, Matthew Perry is the most recent example of that. There is a national initiative by the feds that are giving federal resources to states to investigate these overdoses, to determine the sources of the distributions. Because there are federal laws, there are state laws in our country that also address this. So number 1, the abandonment. Number 2, the distributions. And the distributions are relevant to the U.S. too, because that is a federal initiative going on.
Yeah, and Joe, to that end, you know, for families that have loved ones that die because of drug overdoses or situations like this, it's heartbreaking because they know that their loved one is vulnerable and these vultures are selling them this poison, and it's infuriating. It takes, sadly, these cases with the stars like Matthew Perry, because there's a Matthew Perry in every city of this country who dies every day, whose family gets zero attention and or relief from a prosecutorial standpoint. Should more be done, or you're a criminal defense attorney, is it a bit of a stretch? These are adults taking illegal substances, they should know the inherent risks.
Here's why. This gets back to the basic law of what's called culpable negligence. It means that if I put you, Ted, in a situation that is going to, severely harm you or cause you death, I'm liable. It's basic law. Most states have laws that pertain to this. So if I give you drugs and you overdose on those, I am culpably negligent. Why? Because I caused your death. I didn't want to cause your death. It's a negligence crime, but in fact I did by giving you the fentanyl or the cocaine or whatever it is. So I think these charges are appropriate. In terms of the abandonment charge, that I'm not familiar with. We really don't have per se abandonment in the United States, but I'm sure in Argentina, they have their own laws. So I think at least the second two, which is the people that supplied him with the drugs and then he died, yes, I think it's completely appropriate to charge them.
Yeah, and on the moral compass, leaving your buddy as he falls to his death is an offense for sure. Let's switch topics. Also trending in true crime, this one, boy, has a lot of people shaking their heads. An Oklahoma man ends up getting probation for sex crimes after a jury recommended a 40-year sentence. And now a petition is calling for the judge to resign. Sean Kennedy was found guilty of sexually abusing 2 kids. They were 14 and 12 at the time. A jury heard the case. They recommended 20 years for each count. The judge, Sharon Holmes, ends up sentencing this defendant to 40 years of probation, not 40 years in prison. John Scogan started this petition because something he says similar happened in his family.
I hope enough Tulsans get mad enough about Judge Holmes not protecting our community and protecting our children and sign this petition.
Our Scripps affiliate did contact the judge's office, but a staff member said that Judge Holmes doesn't comment on her cases or her decisions. So the question today is, what was she thinking? Joe Tamburino, this one it's a head shaker.
It is a head shaker, but it's up to judicial discretion. A judge can do that. In many states, a judge has discretion not to go along with a guideline sentence or a jury recommendation. The issue is more of a political issue because in Oklahoma, they elect judges. They elect judges to the district court, the appellate courts. I don't know when this judge is going to be running for re-election, but really this becomes more of a political issue. Was she within her discretion to do this type of sentence? It seems that she was. I think it was a bad decision. However, but it's going to become more of a political issue because I'm sure she's going to run for re-election, and this will be the ¡1 topic.
Mike, one of the statements released by a government official in this case was basically opining that these are the crimes that the community suffers from, that investigators that do all of the work leading up to a jury trial, they now are left with this empty feeling because this guy is basically out there. He's just on probation. From a law enforcement perspective, when either a DA doesn't file the charges or the end of the adjudication doesn't come through the way you'd think it would, how much of a gut punch is it?
Yeah, it's definitely a discovery for law enforcement. See that in New York with our criminal justice system. The investigators do the investigation to the best of their ability, and that's left to the jury and the judge. And it's absolutely frustrating if we don't get the results that we are seeking. So it could be a morality enforcement. It might discourage them.
Yeah, absolutely. Here is that DA statement from the Tulsa DA. When this jury recommended a sentence of 40 years in prison, no one envisioned that this defendant would be walking our streets as a free man. We send people into prison for stealing merchandise. He should have gone to prison for stealing innocence. David Bruno, what's your take on this judge's decision? And, we don't know, there wasn't an accompanying reason. She didn't opine on the bench on the record saying this is why I'm doing it. It was just sort of a sentence. What's your reaction to this?
I'm really unfamiliar with a lot of states that handle it like this. First of all, jury conviction. This is a jury verdict. Also, a jury's recommending a sentence. The court doesn't give a statement of facts or a legal opinion that goes with the decision. And I just wonder, first of all, if I'm a prosecutor on that case, I am appealing it. I'm at least trying to get this up to the appellate courts to look at this. If there was discretion and I'm unfamiliar with that particular statute and sentence. This is a legislator issue because this does not happen in most states. There are mandatory minimums and presumptions of incarceration that attach to most of these types of cases across the country. So if there is discretion on something like this, it is also a issue for the legislator, not just the judiciary, to change the law.
Good point. Very good point. If this was even on the table, why was it on the table after a jury comes back with 2 guilty verdicts? Let's get a break. Coming up, a judge has to decide if accused killer Bryan Kohberger will be eligible for the death penalty. The state wants to put him to death if he's found guilty, possibly. The arguments that could tip the scales in favor of Kohberger is coming up next. Plus,
she called me up and told me the things that Brad had done to her physically. Well, I came up with an alternative plan for her in the hope that she'd move in with me. I never got to tell her the plan.
The mother dead, body still missing, father accused of the murder. Now the couple's daughter is speaking out and she's blaming her dad. This morning's Voice for Victims. It's about the ongoing search for Suzanne Simpson. Stay with us.
Is there anything you say to Suzanne right now if she could hear you?
Suzanne, we love you. We need you. And we pray for you.
This morning, we are being the voice for missing Texas mom and realtor Suzanne Simpson. Her husband now has been charged in her alleged death. Brad Simpson now faces a charge of murder in connection to the presumed death of his 51-year-old wife. No additional details have been released on Brad's arrest, but a press conference is set for this afternoon. According to NBC News, we will be there and we'll update you. It's been a month since the mother of 4 disappeared near Trinity University in San Antonio. Authorities have yet to publicly reveal if her body was found. They did multiple searches at a landfill last month. The couple's 20-year-old daughter, Chandler, took to Instagram to air her grievances with the case, saying, "My mom was a victim of abuse from my father. My father took my mother's life in a state of rage and control. In our community, this should not be happening, and I will not stop speaking as the voice of my mother until she's found." So clearly Chandler has not been told whether or not they've located. They obviously have not located the body, but we'll find out at this press conference today. Let's bring in retired NYPD Detective Mike Alcazar and forensic psychologist Dr. John Delatorre. Mike, when you're investigating something like this, obviously they believe that she's dead. They have now charged the husband. It's a no-body prosecution that they're going to move forward to. Now, pending today's news conference, maybe we'll get more information, but that can be risky, a no-body prosecution. Can it not when you're talking about adults? Maybe even with abuse, you could make the argument as a defense attorney that she ran away.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it would definitely be a little bit more challenging. It'll definitely rely on evidence, and I think that law enforcement have been keeping their cards close to their vest, right? They might have more information that they're going to release today. They might have pinged her phone or his phone at the landfill. They might have recovered DNA evidence in the woods where they were fighting. They might have video surveillance of them driving to certain locations. So it's going to be interesting to see when they reveal the information that they have, that they charge him and develop probable cause to charge him with the murder. And it's going to be very interesting today.
Dr. John, the guy that kills his wife and then does not cooperate on the back end of it, he has his daughter, publicly saying that she believes he's responsible for here. One would think that he would fess up and just and show authorities where the body is, et cetera, et cetera. Why do people not do this? Because you think to yourself, boy, if I ever do something crazy like this, I would admit it. But people don't. Why?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of reasons why. Number one could easily be that their attorney told them, don't say anything to anyone, which is sound legal advice. But the other thing is that if they say it out loud, right, if they say that they are culpable of something, then it makes it real. So long as you keep it kind of within yourself, then you can kind of convince yourself and tell yourself that none of this actually happened, that you're not really guilty of anything, right? You can kind of convince yourself. So it's sort of a delusional state that a lot of people kind of take when it comes to not fully admitting to the culpability of whatever their misbehavior was.
Mike, how frustrating is it investigating a crime like this when you're searching for the body and you really do need sometimes the help of, to your point, you got the cameras, you have the maybe eyewitnesses, but when the case gets cold, you know, when it gets to be the 2, 3, 4 weeks and you're looking in landfills, as an investigator, you really do want closure here, don't you? And how frustrating is that? Needle in a haystack.
Yeah, it's investigators often get very invested in investigations. They want to have a nice resolution for the family and closure. We try to do our best with our investigative diligence, but you know, we only can do what we can do, right? We rely on the evidence, witness testimony, hopefully a confession, maybe when we do interrogations, not in this case, but, you know, we do our best. We continue with the investigation and it is what it is. You know, we present what we present and then the lawyers take over.
John, Dr. John, you live in San Antonio. To what degree has this case captured the attention of the public?
I mean, it's really rattled San Antonio. There's a lot of reasons why it's rattled San Antonio. There's a lot of stuff that's going on when it comes to domestic abuse awareness, intimate partner violence, right? Federal gun issues that are at play. There are a lot of different things that have really kind of shaken San Antonio because of how secret all of this stuff was. All of a sudden, this woman goes missing, and then there's all kinds of other associated stuff going on. And now she's, you know, now we don't have a body for this. The daughter's coming out. There's so much, and it's really kind of rattling San Antonio to its core.
Yeah, the daughter's statement went on to say in her Instagram post, "Shame on my community for not speaking about domestic violence. Within Alamo Heights, women are marginalized by society and misogyny every day and are told to keep their mouths shut." The 20-year-old goes on to write, "Those who choose to remain silent are choosing to blind themselves from domestic violence in our homes. My mother tried to leave my father and lost her life." Boy, you know, Dr. John, back to you. On what does that say about this, the frustration here from this young woman?
Well, she's trying to raise awareness to this. This is not a new problem. This is an ongoing problem that has been manifesting and is pervasive throughout our society. She's calling out, putting a spotlight on the secrecy that a lot of men hold when it comes to objectifying women and believing that their wives are subject to whatever their whims are. And that's not true. And so she's really kind of bringing a voice to her mother, number one, but to all victims, all those victims who haven't died yet, and those that are in really dangerous situations and don't really think that there's a way out. There is, but it's not really talked about.
Yeah, and sadly, and Mike quickly decided, we don't have the mechanism sometimes for people to leave relationships because this sometimes is the ultimate, this is what happens.
Yeah, to your point, if neighbors heard them arguing in the past and there was a history and they notified police and police respond, maybe this could have been prevented. So I agree with what she's saying. I feel for her. And like your guest said, she's a voice for her mother. And I think it's important that domestic violence is reported and so that police can respond.
All right, Dr. John Delatorre and Mike Alcazar, thank you so much for your valuable time and insight. Enjoy your weekends. Gentlemen, coming up, could eliminating the death penalty for Bryan Kohberger tip the scales in his case? And later this morning, Lori Vallow back in court for a hearing on her mental competency. She wants to represent herself in her case in Arizona. We'll hear from her next.
Mr. Jeffrey, tell me what happened that night. killed my wife, I guess. I don't remember none of that.
You don't remember the fight with Lisa?
How many times did you hit her?
5.
You don't remember what her dead body looked like laying out there in front of you?
Not at all.
If you were me, would you believe you?
Interview with a Killer. Sunday, 8, 7 Central. Only on Court TV.
All right, now time for tipping the scales. Defendant Bryan Kohberger wants the death penalty off the table before his case goes to trial. He's accused, of course, of stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death: Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xander Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Kohberger had a hearing yesterday where his defense attorneys argued basically, you got to get rid of the death penalty, Your Honor. They say it violates Kohberger's 8th and 14th Amendment rights, and it would be cruel and unusual punishment. Well, the death penalty is on the table in the state of Idaho. The defense pointed out that even Lori Vallow was taken off of this consideration. Take a listen.
I think you can consider what Judge Boyce did in the Vallow case.
That was as a result of the state having failed to provide the information, violating its court order.
We don't think it's appropriate to force somebody to choose between competing constitutional rights. Lori Vallow had not ever waived speedy trial, and so she had the choice to waive speedy or not face the death penalty. And we think that since we were forced to choose between rights, those should be reinstated and the court should strike the death penalty.
The judge took all of the arguments under consideration. The only ruling he did make yesterday was that Kohberger can wear street clothes in the pretrial hearings. Trial date has been set for August of next year. We're still a long way away here. Still with us, criminal defense attorneys and former prosecutors David Bruno and Joe Tamburino. Joe, we are a long way away. Is this the cart before the horse? Because you could argue, I mean, some of the arguments yesterday was that the Idaho doesn't have a mechanism in place to properly enact this, carry out this sentence of death. Yet, 20 years from now, which realistically is when, if indeed Kohberger is found guilty and sentenced to death, that's when this argument, some would argue, should take place. That's basically what the state said. Your thoughts on doing it now?
Well, it's a good idea for the defense attorneys to do it now. I could see where they're going, but they're going to lose. I mean, you know, let's go through history. The death penalty was first ruled unconstitutional in the Furman case, U.S. Supreme Court, back in 1972. But then a mere 4 years later, in the Gregg case, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed itself and said the death penalty is not unconstitutional. It's not a violation. And then there was a sequential number of Supreme Court cases that basically said, look, the death penalty can be used. It's not unconstitutional as long as it's proportional to the crime. And the crime here is the death of 4 innocent people. So if you're not going to get the death penalty in this case, what would you get the death penalty for? So I think it's good lawyering that they're doing it now. I would do the same thing if I were them. But in the end, they're going to lose.
And David, it doesn't mean that they're giving up on the guilt phase of this case. I know some people have been watched yesterday and thought, oh boy, it sounds like this defense team really thinks he's going to lose because all they're talking about is the penalty. They're apples and oranges, correct?
Oh, without a doubt. This is pre-trial, and I'll advance the reason this is not going to happen. This is a overarching public policy argument. This is not something that a trial court would ever rule on and agree upon. Really, this is something for the legislators. Every state's different. New Jersey does not have the death penalty. There are many states across the country that have used their legislators or their constitutions to prohibit death. And it's really an issue for the legislators. It's on the books. It's allowed in the state. It's either firing squad or lethal injection. And that's not a great challenge here. It doesn't mean that they're not going to challenge the state's case either. We hear a lot from the defense that he is saying he's innocent. I am waiting for the evidence that they have because we know his DNA's on the knife sheath. They got the car going in that area. He turns his phone off. There's a lot of evidence that we know already going to his guilt, but we shall see what else the defense pulls out here.
Yeah, indeed. Here's Ann Taylor on behalf of Bryan Kohberger. She is a zealous advocate, arguing basically Idaho doesn't have something in place right now to really pull off an execution, so you should take it off the table.
When I'm standing before you representing Mr. Kohberger and saying to you that Idaho doesn't have a real means of executing someone. The firing squad ended up on the books because of the difficulty obtaining the drugs to kill somebody. And that's the real problem here. The firing squad hasn't been funded well enough to be built.
I think they're building it right now, as I recall, from the media at least, that the construction's actually underway. But I may be wrong about that.
Joe, it's so bizarre. There's two things going. You have the guy at the defense table, and they're talking about, wow, here's how we might kill you down the line. And then the other part of the equation is the families. The Gonzalez family was there. And this is just the beginning of a very long road. If he is found guilty and sentenced to death, they will endure hearing after hearing after hearing for literally decades with lawyers such as Ms. Taylor, whose sole goal is to try to prevent this punishment from being enacted. And it's tough because you can only imagine. Yesterday they were talking about the fear and anxiety Kohberger would have during this time period, not knowing if he would be put to death and how if he was sentenced to death. These families are thinking, well, what about the fear and anxiety of my kid? What do you do to get victims up to speed of what is about to happen, because they're in for a very long road?
They are, and the only thing you could do is to prepare them. You bring up a great issue, which is, yes, you have the defendant sitting there at the table and they're talking about, well, he's going to be, if he's found guilty, he's going to die, he's going to be put to death. And could he be frightened or have anxiety right before that? Well, sure, that's just a human reaction. However, these poor victims went through the same thing. So again, I think this defense attorney is doing her job, but this argument that, well, Idaho hasn't set up anything yet. Well, that's like saying if you got a 20-year prison sentence, gee, we don't have a facility yet for the last 5 years of your sentence, but at your first 15, we've got something for you. And that's what's going to happen here, because if they find him guilty and if they impose the death penalty, there's no way he's going to be put to death in the next few years. There will be a sequential amount of appeals, not only in Idaho, but in the federal courts. He might not be put to death till 20 years from now. So this whole issue of, well, Idaho doesn't have a system yet, they're building one, and they sure will have one by the time, if he's found guilty and imposed the death penalty, that he's put to death.
Yeah, and to that point, David, 20 years from now, the method of an execution could be vastly different than what we have now. I mean, if you go 20 years back, 30 years, 40, 50 years back, you start talking about not only firing squads, but old Sparky, and go way back, and they were hanging people. So this evolves. To people that are thinking this is a ridiculous argument, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, look, it could even evolve with the legislator. Like I said earlier, the climate changes, the composition of the legislators change. There are many changes that could take place that can affect this. That's why, they're protecting the record. Any trial lawyer knows that they have to make these objections and file these pretrial motions now, because they have to preserve these arguments on appeal just in case he is convicted. Then they could argue on appeal, and that is the reason that this is happening now. This is the reason why they're bringing this forth.
Absolutely, and Ann Taylor's doing a fantastic job, and I'm sure it's frustrating for some of our viewers to listen to some of her arguments, but she is advocating on behalf of her client. Joe Tamburino, David Bruno, as always, thank you so much. Enjoy your Friday. Have a great weekend. That's it for our opening statements. Coming up, we're going to highlight Lori Vallow's mental competency in the state of Arizona. Stay with us.